I'm Joe Pardavila, and you are listening to the Forbes Books Podcast. So, what do you do when you build one of the biggest companies the planet has ever seen? You buy an island? You build a rocket? You travel the world? Well, my guest this week has built one of the biggest companies you've ever seen and has decided to spend the rest of his life helping the next generation of entrepreneurs. His name is Marc Randolph, and he is the co-founder of Netflix. He's here to talk about all things business, including NFTs, cryptocurrency, the stock market, and so much more. Marc, welcome to the podcast.
A pleasure to be with you, Joe. Thanks for having me.
So, Marc, you have trailed such an amazing career, and I almost feel like you're like the CEO whisperer because you've taken it upon yourself to help the next generation of leaders and CEOs in this world. Why did you decide to pick up that mantle? I'm curious because most folks like yourself could like ride off on the sunset and, I know you like to surf, maybe just end up in the ocean somewhere, but you decided to keep going and helping people out. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I guess, Joe, the quick answer is I had a revelation.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
And actually, this is going to be probably the most obnoxious introduction to a story you've ever heard.
Love it.
I was invited by Richard Branson to come hang out on one of his private islands for 4 or 5 days.
You can stop right there. That's pretty damn obnoxious. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to put that behind us, though, because The thing is that what I was doing was I was going to speak at a conference that he was holding there, and it was for people who had had a lot of success in their life, and they were wondering what next. And I was going to go there and talk about all that I've learned about how to turn your ideas into realities, all the stuff that I have learned over 40 years of being an entrepreneur, about how to take something in your head and make it real. And I figured, this is great. I'll go, I'll do my thing, maybe an hour, and then I'll spend 3 days hanging out on the beach with my wife. But I go and I do my thing, and then I decide I'm going to stick around a little bit because the whole theme of this conference is finding your purpose. So I go, let me see what this finding your purpose stuff is all about. And I was transfixed. And the sunscreen went unused, didn't even go to the beach. And I spent 3 days like absorbing all this stuff. And what I realized was that I had this weird platform. At the time, I was doing a lot of public speaking, and I could go and show up, and I'd get 10,000 people in the seats, and they'd spend an hour listening to me. And I'd say, but what am I using that for? And I realized that all of these tips and tricks and secrets that I'd learned over my 4 decades as an entrepreneur were broadly applicable. That this wasn't just about starting companies. This is about people unlocking the ideas they had in their head. And that was the moment. And I said, my time now is to take that and get people going, to get people to start, to get people who are stuck and make them unstuck. And it's the reason that I wrote the book, That Will Never Work, about Netflix, because I wanted people to see how we applied these things in a business setting, but also translate it to how they apply to everybody. It's why I do the podcast, where I actually spend 30 minutes mentoring real people with real problems, because I don't want to just dispense these trite generalities like just do it or just get started. I want to show people how you actually can do these things. Okay, now here's the not 100% Mr. Altruist guy. It's my way of kind of getting my startup fix. Helping other people get their businesses going lets me do the thing that I love about being an entrepreneur, which is that sitting at a table with really smart people and solving really interesting puzzles.
I don't know if this is analogous or not, Marc, but I get the vibe of, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, when you go into a grocery store and you see like a senior citizen bagging groceries, and it's like because they need to have a purpose in retirement. They might have been a lawyer or a doctor, but they feel like they need to do something in retirement. Is this sort of your version of bagging groceries in retirement?
I certainly haven't used that analogy before, and quite frankly, Joe, I'm not sure I'm going to reuse it. But there certainly is an element of that. But for me, it was more that, listen, once you're an entrepreneur, you can't turn it off. I mean, you're always seeing problems in the world that you want to fix. And so when you get to the point, as I did, where you go, listen, Netflix is my 6th company, and I did one more after that. And I was at the point where I go, gosh, I'm not sure I really want to start another company. It's so 7 by 24. I'd like to pursue other things. And so you're looking for some way to scratch that itch. How can I keep on being an entrepreneur without being all in by doing my own company? So in a lot of ways, it's that. I call it my startup methadone. It's a way of kind of keeping my addiction at bay and allowing me to really have a rest of my life. But again, I don't do it. I don't do it for the money. I don't do it. I do it because I really enjoy seeing other people have some of the same opportunities that I had. I mean, listen, you don't do these things by yourself. I mean, I got tons of help and support along the way. And it's the least I can do now is to try and pay it forward.
I respect the fact that you can just play along and buy into my analogy. You decided to just throw it back in my face. So thank you very much for that, Mark. Much appreciated. You're using that Netflix sort of terminology of radical candor, so I do appreciate that, Mark. I wonder because I like to ask this when some sort of event happens in people's lives. So when Richard Branson asked you to go on that bougie trip, do you ever do the sliding doors thing and be like, what if you never went on that trip? What if you decided to tell Richard, Rich, I'm too busy. I got something else to do. I don't want to go to your island. Do you think about that ever?
Well, certainly all the time. And just as a quick aside, when Richard Branson said, would you come to my island, I did say no. And I came back in, I told my wife, and I go, yeah, listen, Richard just invited us to go hang out on the island for 4 days. But listen, I've got some guys coming up to go mountain biking this weekend. So I said no. And she goes, no. You've got that wrong. And of course, there we go. We're buying the sunscreen and packing the towels.
That is hysterical. That's a great aside because I can only imagine like your wife in your wife's position being like, what are you, an idiot? You can go mountain biking every time. You live in the mountains. You can do that anytime. You can't go to Richard Branson's for 4 days every time. So you've obviously married above your head, or as they say, outkicked your cover. So well done, Mark.
Yeah, but the thing is, there is this element of path not taken all the time. I mean, and what I've kind of concluded is it's impossible to know, and you can't look back that way. Because there's so many things in my life where things go terribly wrong and end up going terribly right. I mean, and just to give you two really quick examples of that, there was this time, this is well before Netflix, and I was up for this job, and I ended up getting offered this great job. And it was for a company. This is at the beginning when just cell phones were just out, and it was making the very first web browser for a cell phone. And I was going to be their head of marketing, and I knew what my job title was going to be. I knew where I'd sit. I knew how many stock options I'd get. And I turned it down, did something else. And about 3 years later, I was driving along, and because I figured, who's going to ever want to browse the internet on a cell phone? So I said no. And a few years later, I'm driving along, and all of a sudden, I, on my pager or something, check the stock price for that company, and I had almost, had an arrhythmia. I had to pull over because I was hyperventilating at how much money I had left on the table by not taking that job. But the job I did, I ended up starting a small company with two of my friends, which is the company we sold to another company called Pure Atria, which is a company that had been started and was being run by a guy named Reed Hastings. And I went to work for Reed, which is where I met Reed Hastings, who, of course, is the person that I co-founded Netflix with. So sometimes these things which seem like unrecoverable errors can turn out great.
In other words, Mark, it's okay to say no. Like the time you said no to Branson, you were off. But this time around, it worked out well that you said no.
And that's the thing. You can't tell. I mean, there's this classic story of when Reed and I tried to sell Netflix to Blockbuster. And we really wanted that deal. We needed that deal. And Blockbuster said no. And at the time, I was crushed. But of course, what would have happened if they had said yes? I mean, that would have been an entirely different path of history. So I've long learned that you can't look back at decisions you've made, good or bad, and think that there was a problem there. Everything happens for a reason.
And speaking of that, Mark, if you don't mind me diving into that Blockbuster thing, because I know a lot has been said about Blockbuster because now there's this nostalgia factor where people are all, you see random photos of like people still having their Blockbuster card, and you're seeing all these documentaries about the last Blockbuster and a lot of the times people will dial back to that time when they said no to Netflix. But if you dig deeper, there are other layers to the why Blockbuster failed. You being almost on the inside, you could probably just put a capper on this. It wasn't just because they turned down Netflix that Blockbuster went the way of the dodo bird. It was more to that than just that simple decision. Because I think a lot of people are like, oh boy, that company just exploded because they didn't buy Netflix. But there was more to that, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole bunch of reasons why Blockbuster didn't make it. And, listen, Netflix was one, but it took a long, long time for Netflix to achieve any kind of scale where it was really threatening. I mean, Blockbuster had fundamental other problems. It was a changing world of entertainment. I mean, customers were saying, we want to watch movies in different ways. And Blockbuster was slow to respond to that. And it's the classic problem that confronts every large, established, successful company, is that they're smart people. They see that the world's changing. They see they need to adapt to it. But usually that means cannibalizing their existing business model. And a lot of times they don't have the courage to do that. They're scared to walk away from the present to do what the future requires. But the customers don't care about their old responsibilities. They don't care about, my biggest distributor will be upset. Oh, the franchisees will freak out. The customers don't care. They're going to do what they want to do. And what they wanted to do was watch movies in different ways.
Yeah.
And Blockbuster never adapted to that.
I have a feeling, though, Mark, and I don't know if you agree with this, there is going to be sort of this correction where you're probably going to see this nostalgia factor. You know how vinyl records came back, and you have like hipsters buying vinyl. I have a feeling that in the very near future, we're going to see like random DVD stores that sort of mimic, especially now because people are loving shows like Stranger Things that are rooted in the 80s and 90s. Do you see that there could be like a niche market for like DVDs and video cassettes in the future?
Well, if so, I'm really going to regret giving away all those boxes of DVDs that I used to have.
You could open up your own store.
I could have, but it's the same thing. I don't know about you. Wait, let me guess, Joe. You're one of those guys who in his garage probably still has all of his LPs from back when he was in high school.
No, but because I'm not that old, Mark, but I do have my DVDs from high school. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm just one off below you there, Mark.
Okay.
But you got me squared. You just had the wrong medium in there. But yeah, still have a lot of my old DVDs. But I will say, I mean, one of the great things that Netflix did was I'm a big fan of no clutter. So and you know this as well as I do, Mark, when these DVDs populated in your life, they took up so much room. And the idea that you can own a film library or just stream with a subscription service these thousands of movies that used to take up room in people's houses, it's amazing how it's changed sort of like the aesthetic of the way we live, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's just so convenient. I mean, listen, I was a little bit, I won't say I was a laggard, but, I did have this nostalgic thing because, of course, when Netflix started for the first 9 years, we were a DVD by mail company. So I was all in. And then, of course, when Netflix began offering streaming, I, of course, jumped on that, but I kept my DVD by mail subscription. And it took several years before I realized, I've had these discs sitting here and I don't watch them. I mean, there's the analogy. Boy, this is like you should call this the analogy show. I'm really kind of cranking on these.
We got him.
I'm a home winemaker, so I make my own wine, and I'll be the first person to confess that I'm terrible at it. And the way that I know that I'm terrible is, even though I do a reasonably good job, I will say, "Okay, it's time for a bottle of wine for dinner," and I'll walk over to the little wine closet, and I'll want to reach for one of my own, and I'll go, "Nah, I'll go for the professional bottle." And it's the same thing. You kind of want the nostalgia of watching DVD, and you can give all the arguments you want about, it's the higher quality, and you have all the extras, but no, it's so nice just to be able to pick up a clicker, lean back on the couch, and thumb through, and then boom, there goes the movie. Yeah. That's really nice.
Absolutely. And it's funny, you've already sort of shown the audience that I'm quite an old man. But I also remember the time where, I know Netflix is going through stuff now, but I do remember their first sort of like hiccup when they decided to split their DVD and streaming service. I think it was it Quickster or something like that. Were you there for that, or were you gone by that point?
I was gone by that. But,
okay.
but I recognized that what they were doing as clearly as if I'd been sitting in the room, because that is exactly that type of courage that I was just describing to you. Back when when Netflix was very new, people first of all don't realize it was a DVD by mail company, but even fewer people realized. And we started, we actually sold DVDs in addition to renting them. And at the beginning, that we were phenomenally successful at that. In fact, probably at the beginning, 99% of our revenue came from selling DVDs.
Wow.
So it was nice having that volume because it made us feel like we were actually doing something. But we knew strategically this was terrible because selling DVDs is a commodities business. That eventually we knew Amazon is going to begin selling DVDs, and then Walmart's going to sell DVDs, and Kmart and PetSmart, and everyone is selling them, and then the margins go to zero and you're out of business. And the other problem is that because we both sold DVDs and rented them, customers were confused. And we came to this realization that if we were going to get it right, we had to pick one. And that was a courageous decision, which is, do you pick selling, which is paying 99% of your salary, but is eventually going to go away, or do you bet it all on rental, which if you can get it to work, could be a huge business, but was showing no promise. And so I had to do this incredibly scary thing of pulling the plug, walking away from selling, and betting everything on renting. And when you walk away in a single day from 99% of your revenue, it has a way of, focusing your attention. And I did that when we had probably several 100,000 customers. Wow. And years later, when all of a sudden Netflix was streaming, it was the exact same thing. You had a business which was streaming and another business which was renting, and it was very clear which one was the future, and it was very clear that doing both at the same time was very confusing to customers. And what Netflix decided was they were going to bet it all on the streaming and be willing to walk away from the DVD by mail. And what they did was they mishandled it. So yes, it was poorly done, but the strategic thinking behind it was brilliant. And I recognized, and I went, oh my gosh, I had the courage to do this when I had several 100,000 employees. Reed had the courage to do this when he had tens of millions of customers.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I remember that time because I was working in morning radio, and we did like a parody song, like making fun of Reed. Like it was and it's for some reason I'll always remember that because we made fun of Netflix. Like we just were really brutally, brutal candor. We were pretty brutally critical of it. But then looking back and to see what it's become, it's crazy. Like I don't think a lot of companies, and maybe you disagree with this, could have come back from something like that. I think there's a very small amount of companies that could have rebounded from such a PR nightmare and maybe even financial nightmare. I'm not sure what it looked like under the hood, but what do you think about that? Do you think many companies could have survived that?
It's a tricky thing because the misstep was, in my opinion, like I said, was not a strategic misstep. It was a tactical misstep. And what happens more frequently is the opposite, is companies strategically get it wrong. What they did was they said, okay, we split them apart, and we charged people the same price for both halves, and we didn't communicate. Yeah, it was terrible. But what came back is that internally, nothing changed. The decision, which is this company is going to focus from this point forward on getting streaming right at the expense of the DVD by mail business. Any decision that has to get made is optimized solely for streaming. And yes, it took a while. But by staying focused on that, Netflix, of course, survived. And, we've seen the amazing progress they made. Yeah. So they learned a big lesson there. But I think what they learned was actually have the courage to stick to doing what's right. And that it's one of the key cultural things about Netflix that make me very confident that they'll persevere forever.
And it's safe to assume you still have Netflix stock, right? Like you all that stuff, like your IRA and all that stuff with Netflix, like I do. Like you have some Netflix in there.
A little bit, but
A
for the
little bit.
most part, I've been gone for a long time, so I've had a chance to diversify out. And but I absolutely am a stockholder for no other reason than for sentimental reasons.
Cool. Well, because full disclosure, I am as well. I probably have a few less than you, but the reason I ask is because for many years, the station I work with in New York was owned by Disney, which was always a great company to work with. But then they eventually got smart and like, why are we owning radio stations? So they sold us. But the great thing about being part of Disney was you owned, they gave you stock options, so which is great. My question here is, long story short, where I'm getting with it is the fact that now Disney's stock is living and dying by their streaming, which is to me, it's really hard to believe. Like now, all of a sudden, I don't even want to look now, but I think it's around less than $100, which I think back in the last few years was like 160, 180, whatever. Is it frightening to you that a legacy company like Disney that is still producing top flight entertainment in movies and television and obviously theme parks all over the world, that their stock price and is being sort of judged by the number of subscribers that sign up for Disney Plus? Is that weird to you? Because it's weird to me.
So there's two ways I'm going to answer that, if you'll pardon me for hedging a little bit.
Please do.
So on one hand, I don't know the first thing about how the market judges companies, and quite frankly, I don't care. It's very short term. It's based on how things seem, not on how they are. It's, what does Jeff Bezos say? It's based on how they're viewed, not what they weigh. And it should be based on what they weigh. And so I don't care, and I don't worry about that stuff. On the other hand, to the degree it's being judged on its streaming, I think is fantastic, because Disney I have huge respect for, because a lot of companies, when finally in around 2019 began to realize that, oh my gosh, this thing that Netflix bet on back in 2007 has been doing for the most part by itself for all those years, that all came to the realization that, wow, this internet TV is perhaps the future of entertainment, and all of a sudden rushed to get on board. But the company who went all in was Disney. And that's why I believe they are the really big competitor to Netflix, because they've recognized that to be successful in these businesses, you've got to be all in. You've got to commit. It's exactly that same courage thing, which is becoming the theme of our discussion here.
Yeah.
They had the courage to say, this is where it is. It's not theatrical. It is not linear TV. If we're going to be successful, we have to be dominant in this business. And I think analysts are recognizing that that's true as well, which is why they pay so much attention to how well Disney does in streaming. But the thing about looking at quarterly ads and misses is ridiculous, though. It's not going to be measured. Your success isn't measured by how you're doing one quarter versus the next.
Well, that's why it drives me crazy, Mark, because, again, I own the stock in it, but it's not like my whole life's in it. But to me, it's frustrating because this is such a powerful company with so much to it for the street to just be like, oh, okay, they only have 100 million subscribers. It's like, it's very weird. And I mean, you've made your point there, but I don't mean to rehash it over and over again. But to me, it's just like, it's incredibly frustrating. I can only imagine what it's like inside to be like, my God, all of our parks are completely jam-packed. People around the globe know what Mickey Mouse is. They wear the Mickey ears and everything like that. And it's just, to me, I just don't understand that, because like you said, Robert Iger was incredibly wise in investing in Disney, and I think they ended up spending a lot of money to get out of licensing deals with like the Netflixes of the world, so they could own all their content. So they put a lot of money into it at the front end to see where it is now. So I just wish the Wall Street wasn't so GD, like focused on one thing as opposed to like a whole picture.
So there's a couple things about this. So number one, what Disney does so brilliantly is exactly what you said, and what Iger, was largely the pioneer of, was recognizing that these beloved characters, these beloved brands, so to speak, are actually monetized other ways besides just how they're viewed. But that value comes from the viewing. The fact that people are willing to stand in line for 4 hours to go to a ride attraction, which is based on a movie or a television show, is because of fundamentally that television show. And so they have to get that part right. And what they're recognizing is the way that customers experience for the first time and come to love these characters is by watching them on TV or on their phone, but by viewing them in those mediums.
Yeah.
And so as for the Wall Street angle, watching about a company's subscriber rate is probably the correct metric, but looking at that metric over a quarterly one is the wrong time period.
Okay.
So let's look at Disney's subscriber levels over a 5-year or 10-year horizon. And in the event they do get to 1 billion subscribers, fantastic. If they're only at 100 million, terrible. So it's the right metric. It's just the wrong time horizon.
Got it. All right, cool. Well, thank you for clearing that up for me because
And listen, taking financial advice from me is probably the worst possible thing you and your listeners can do. So bear that in mind.
Well, I mean, it's not even financial advice. It's more just like how you look at financials. I think that's the thing we've agreed upon here. And so, when you see all these streamers, touting the number of subscribers, we talked about Disney, how pretty much their stock rides on how many subscribers they have. At what point do you think it caps out? Because the numbers are astronomical to begin with. Like the fact that Disney's only been around for 3 years and they have like hundreds of millions of subscribers, like how high can that number go? And I'm not just talking about Disney. I'm just saying people signing up for streaming. Because to me, Mark, to date ourselves, it feels like the 80s and 90s cable bundles where you have to have, instead of the 500 channels that they give you, now you have to have like 500 different streamers. Like, where do some of these die in the vine? Does it become reduced that there's only 2 or 3 streamers? Like, because there's only going to be so many eyeballs for these streamers.
So listen, there's a couple ways to look at this. For one, let's look at the total possible market for streaming. I mean, we're still, in my opinion, at the beginning of that market. For example, I mean, how many internet-connected cell phones are there in the world? I mean, that number is in the low billions, probably. Mm-hmm. And now let's look at other entertainment. Let's look at how many daily average users TikTok has, or YouTube has, or Instagram has. I mean, that is the market. Any place that someone is consuming content on a device is potential for the streamers to reach out to. We're at the beginning of this transformation. So I think what we're not going to see necessarily is attacking streamers taking audience from each other. What you're seeing is this gradual erosion of the other conventional ways that people used to consume TV and movies, and that moving to streaming. So I think we're going to look back at this and say, oh my gosh, Netflix, 220, whatever it is, million, how quaint. It's going to be pretty dominant. And, you're right. I think perhaps there's a glut of streaming channels now. But I think just at the reason that there were cable bundles, there's always going to be room for a lot. You're probably going to have, 2 or 3, I'm not sure what to call them, large channels like Netflix and Disney and Prime and Hulu, who basically try and serve almost every audience. But there's always going to be room for niches. I subscribe to the big ones, of course, but I have some niche stuff. I watch F1, which I can't get on Disney, or I watch AFL, Australian rules football. I can't watch those on the conventional channels. I watch BritBox, which has a lot of the obscure British and international stuff that I like. And so I think we're going to end up being able to build our own cable bundle, if you will.
And so your wife, Lorraine, doesn't complain that there's too many apps on this TV or anything like that? She's cool with all these apps you've subscribed to?
No. Yeah, it's a little messy sometimes. Because, listen, the worst question you can always ask me is, what are you watching? Because I always feel it's a gotcha because I never can really remember anymore what channel which show is on.
Right, yeah.
And it's because I watch stuff across the spectrum. But there is this bit of a glut because all of a sudden you'll go, gosh, there's this cool show that I'd love to watch, and you find it and it's on a channel you don't subscribe to, and it's like, oh man, another one.
The struggle is real.
I guess,
Mark,
yeah, the struggle's real. That's right. I feel your pain, Joe. I feel your pain.
All right, so I don't know if you can answer this or not, but you mentioned you subscribe to Netflix. You don't get a free membership for being a co-founder?
I do not, and I may be so it may be a self-inflicted wound, if you will, in that years ago at the very beginning, I wanted all the employees to really empathize with our customers. I wanted them to see the credit card charge. I wanted them to see what it was like signing up, putting a credit card in. And so I said, no, there's no freebies. So unfortunately,
Really?
I'm the victim. I mean, I think they might have changed that more recently, or I don't know. Actually, I have no idea what the policy is anymore.
That's
But
funny.
I'll tell you, I pay for it every month.
Okay, all right, good to know. I mean, it's sad, but it's good to know.
And I don't share my password.
Oh, good. I would hope you didn't, because I know that's a big thing. We don't need to go there, but I know it's a big thing with what Netflix is going through right now. All right, so a couple things. As you can tell from our conversation, Mark, I'm pretty honest. So I'm going to be honest with you right now. I am not bullish on NFTs, but I believe you are to an extent, because you've joined the board of an NFT company called Cheese Inc. So, I mean, I'm assuming that you are bullish on NFTs. May I ask why?
So first of all, Joe, I'll be equally honest. Man, you are missing the boat.
Okay.
No, I got to tell you, listen, every new technology needs to find its way. But the fundamental underlying technology of an NFT, of course, is blockchain. And blockchain, as I look at that and as I learn more and I get deeper into it, I feel the same way that I felt back in 1993, 94, when one of the guys from IT came in and installed a browser on my computer for the first time. And I experienced the internet. And I remember so strongly back then going, oh my God, this is going to change everything. And at the time, I did not know how. I did not know who was going to win, who was going to lose. I just saw it was going to disrupt so many different ways that things were being done with a new, better way. It's exactly how I feel now as I look at blockchain. If I was a younger man, I'd be all in. And so let's talk about NFTs for a second. You're correct. I've joined a company called Cheese, which is facilitating people creating NFTs for photography and creating benefit for photographers. But what NFTs you read about, so much of the hype. You read about people who just take images and throw them out there, and people buy them and sell them, and you're seeing these gasps of people trying to figure out how this works. And yeah, a lot of it's garbage. But there is fundamental utility in being able to prove ownership once and for all, to be able to track things, to have revenue go to the creators, not to the platforms. So many things are going to be different. I'm all in.
Okay. All right. So the reason I'm not bullish, and it's not because I'm not one of these people that, I poo-poo early adopters. I feel like it's one jump too early. I don't feel, because a lot of NFT is tied into cryptocurrency and purchasing them through crypto. And I feel like the mainstream is still not totally on board with crypto. And I feel once that happens, then I think you can make the logical next move to something like an NFTs. But I just don't think it's there yet. And you're seeing the volatility in crypto, and which I find humorous. And again, I don't want to be like anti-tech and everything like that. But for years, people in the crypto space have been talking about how the economy and things that happen in countries have no effect on the value of cryptocurrency. Well, here in 2022, as we record this in June, I think crypto, the Bitcoin especially, is down to its lowest point in many, many years. I know you probably disagree with me, but I think the Bitcoin cryptocurrency early adopters need to become more mainstream for the NFT jump to happen.
You know, what you're seeing is not the failure of a technology. What you're seeing is the very, very early stages of a technology that is still looking for its utility. I'm not denying that it's very early. I'm just saying I'm patient. And one of the things that I've proven to myself is that being early is not, the signs of being early are not the signs of failure. They're the signs of a market finding its way. I mean, if you look back, I'm not sure when this was, the early days of the automobile. I mean, there was, hundreds of automobile companies. Yeah, and eventually it winnowed down to 4 or 5. But those 4 or 5 became hugely valuable as the world began to realize this thing is way better than the horse. And of course, you look back in 1990, we started Netflix in 1998. And from 1998 to the year 2000 was this incredible boom in dot-coms. as there was thousands of companies coming out doing all kinds of ridiculous stuff. But that's the era that created the Amazons and the Netflixes and the Googles and the Facebooks and a lot of these companies which did become dominant. And that 99% of those companies are gone. But big ones came out of it, and it changed the way we do a lot of things. And you're going to see the same thing here. Yes, how many cryptocurrencies are there? There's probably in the hundreds, if not in the low thousands. Are all of them going to be successful? Of course not. Most of them are going to be dead. A few of them are going to be these dominant ways that we financially transact in the future. So, yes, it's way early. You should not in a million years should someone take their nest egg and put it into crypto. You should not bet on these companies at that level. But it's fascinating, and there's some really interesting stuff going on. And for someone like myself, who is by their very nature an early stage person, as I said at the very beginning of our discussion, who gets their thrill out of sitting around the table with smart people and solving interesting problems, this is a really, really interesting problem. And there's some very, very smart people who are working on it.
All right, my last poo-poo about NFT is that for me as a working class, I like to say I'm a blue-collar guy in a white-collar world, is that it looks like a rich man's game. And I know it's not, but in the press, all you're hearing about is this NFT sold for $1 million, this NFT sold for $2 million, this NFT sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this could just be more of a marketing PR problem than an actual problem. But what do you say to that?
It's like saying you don't want to buy a comic book because, Superman #1 went for $375,000. Yeah, but you can still go down to the store and spend $2 on a comic book, and NFT and get value out of it. And NFTs are the same way. Yeah, you can get a Bored Ape yacht club for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, I don't care. That's ridiculous. But there's some really interesting things that are not just pictures to look at, that are providing utility. That are very reasonably priced. I mean, my son, he does $25 or $30 a pop and stuff, and he's really getting some real value out of it.
But you see what you're saying though? It's the marketing problem, because I don't think anyone knows about these $20 and $30 NFTs, because all we're hearing about, because I know we've been doing a lot of analogies this way, but your comic book analogy. Comic books have been around for hundreds of years, and we all know that they come at a pretty low price point. There's a low barrier for entry. I don't think anyone really knows about the low barrier of entry for NFTs.
Yeah, fair enough. And so that requires kind of digging in and beginning to learn a little bit about it. But listen, for every Bored Ape, there's 100,000 other ones. And the trick is I guess here's the big one. I'm not a speculator. That's really the interest here. I'm not doing this to try and buy low and sell high. The ones that I'm interested in provide utility. They do something. You get some value. The NFT is not just a picture. I say, I own that picture. It's really, it's a contract or it's a deed that gets you permission to do something else. Those are the ones that I find really interesting, and that's where I'm getting the value from. Okay. All I tell people is, don't just run out and buy things, but I'm telling you, it is worth understanding. And the way you understand is by plunging in. And you can plunge in by getting a wallet and converting $30 or $50 into crypto and buying a $15 or $20 NFT and seeing what this is all about. And believe me, once you feel it, it's very, very different. Our rational minds dismiss it because our rational minds can't grasp it. But then when you do it and you own this little thing and you go, I actually love this little thing, this little picture. And it's an emotional thing. It's very, very different. But we're emotional creatures at heart. And so ignoring that because our logical minds tell us it's stupid, that's how you miss opportunities.
All right, so you're telling me not to sell my Netflix and Disney stock and convert it to crypto, right? That's what you're telling me right now.
Yeah, don't quit your day job either, Joe.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that for at least another 20, 30 years, Mark. All right, so a couple things before I let you go. I feel like a lot of business books are very disposable. You'll see they're a dime a dozen. But your book, That Will Never Work, which actually just was released in paperback form pretty recently, it's pretty long lasting. I think people still get a lot from it. Why do you think yours is not just your typical business book that comes and goes and people forget about it? Why do you think this has had such an impact on folks?
I think for one is that this is a story. This is not me dispensing business wisdom. It's certainly not a book about trying to convince people how smart I am and look at all the brilliant things I did. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite. I kind of felt that there was this glorification of entrepreneurship, that people thought, oh, starting companies, it's all about pitching and raising money and being on Shark Tank and going to parties and being rich. And it's not. It's a very, very different thing. It's fun, but it's hard. And I wanted people to get this real story of what it's like being in a startup, which is why I wanted to tell that story of how really just a handful of people with no experience in the video business built a company that eventually, took down Blockbuster and changed how we watch TV. So it's a story, and it's a good story. But you're right, it does give you some lessons, but not in an explicit way, more of an implicit way, where you see, rather than saying, here's how to do it, you get to see how we did it, how we made decisions. And you see how I messed up and learned a lot about not just being a business person, but about being a person along the way.
Awesome. And, I basically ripped off your idea for the book from my book, because that's how I wrote. I basically read your book and I'm like, I want to write a book like this, except for communication and podcasting. So thank you for allowing me to rip off your model there for my book. So that's, I just wanted to share that with you.
It's okay, because I ripped off Shoe Dog, so it's all's fair in love and books.
But I will say that it's quite a dramatic drop from Phil Knight to Marc Randolph to Joe Parneville. I think that is a very steep drop. But even just being in that same sentence, that same sphere, I will take any day. Marc, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Joe, it's truly been a pleasure, and good luck to you. And let me know when you buy that first NFT.
Will do. Thank you very much, Marc. And that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you take a quick second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.